I will talk about a FRA research product, since I'm here representing the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, FRA for short, which was devoted to explore legal entry channels for persons in need of international protection. So it was published in 2015. It's a short, less than 20 pages long document. And I will not only focus on humanitarian visas for asylum purposes, but I'll make a broader tour d'horizon covering all other possible legal tools. So first of all, which are the benefits of legal entry channels, of creating and offering those? Just to name a few, they give better protection for those in need. They conceive the message of a strong and genuine international solidarity. They can also help in fighting against smuggling and trafficking, and can help contribute to disrupting the business models of smugglers. We all know that it's like nowadays, it's a commonplace if we establish those channels, as well as they can contribute to fight abuse and exploitation, especially in case of women. Then they also bring security, more controlled immigration, and in case of those people arriving via those channels, need less rehabilitation. Because of the whole context, not mentioning better integration, and via these avenues it's also possible to fill a skills gap better, to have better labor or skills matching. Then okay, it's good, but of course there are some risks associated with creating legal entry channels. So I will just mention a few risks and then add how these can be mitigated via various measures. For instance, one risk is that the selection of the beneficiaries of international protection or those in need is difficult. It's difficult to say yes for some and no to others, so how to do that? It can be mitigated by objective and transparent criteria if it's well communicated to the communities concerned. Then another risk is that these channels could encourage migration, so these can be conceived as pull factors. Nevertheless, a possible mitigation is to enhance protection in countries of first asylum how to say, in order that less people would need it. Then a further risk is the possible criminal misuse of those channels. Of course, if we open up, then traffickers, smugglers can also make use of those. As a mitigation, if member states are willing to harmonize conditions amongst themselves, to check security, I mean to set the same security standards against which people eligible are scanned, then it can also be a mitigating factor. And final one, yes, I mean creating those channels needs additional resources, more money, human resources, etc. But as a mitigation, the savings from, let's say, spontaneous arrivals can be used for the management of orderly arrivals. So we save on one hand, and then we can use that money to create such channels. And in this focus paper, we put together a toolbox of various options on legal ways for access to Europe. There are two blocks. One is related to refugee centered schemes such as resettlement, humanitarian admission, visas for humanitarian purposes, and temporary protection. And the other building block is composed of regular mobility schemes such as family unification, labor mobility, students mobility, and medical evacuation. And as a third overarching option, which is on the right, it's a new one, we can mention private sponsorships schemes as well. So in the remaining time, it's a bit more than 5 minutes, I will go through really telegraphically these measures. Starting with resettlement and humanitarian admission, we know that these are similar, although there are differences between them. So resettlement with UNHCR means the selection and transfer of refugees from where they have found protection to a third country, which has agreed to admit them as refugees on a permanent basis. In the EU context, it's like taking a person in need of international protection from a third country, so outside of the EU, into an EU member state. And humanitarian admission operates in a similar way, but the selection of the admitting state is either with or without the support of UNHCR, and there are more divergences between the individual humanitarian admission programs. And as a result, the person concerned receives a leave to stay or on protection or on other grounds. So it's not necessarily a permanent status. And on the EU agenda, there's also a pending proposal on humanitarian admission scheme from Turkey, but there are other national, let's say, initiatives as well. Then at this point, just let me mention some figures with regard to Syrian refugees who have been admitted using these channels. These are UNHCR figures as of 2017. The overall number of resettlement and humanitarian admission for Syrians is a bit more than 211,000 people. So this is since the beginning of the civil war as of last year. The number of humanitarian visas issued is a bit more than or almost 18,000. Then private sponsorships concerned a bit more than 24,000 people. Academic scholarships, so that's student mobility or researchers' mobility, have been used in almost 1,500 cases. So total, we have 250,000 people, Syrians, 250,000 Syrians who received this kind of any of those protection channels. Then humanitarian visas. This is the second way from the refugee-related schemes. It was extensively elaborated by Violetta, so just to mention that, yeah, the visa code in FRA's interpretation also allows for the issuance of such Schengen visa C visas under Article 25 as an LTV visa. We also know XX case and the repercussions of this jurisprudence at EU competence to issue the visas at the consulates. So I leave it here just to show that we mapped this scenario as well. Then we can also mention D visas, the long stay visas issued in national competence. It's still envisaged by Schengen acquis. An example for that can be France, who received Haiti earthquake victims, or Iraqi Christians in 2010. Of course, humanitarian visas have many obstacles, like access to consular representation, a better geographic coverage would be needed, and the like. And in this context, just a new thing which is now being discussed, the new European Travel Information Authorization System, the ETIAS, which is for visa-free travelers. The Commission's proposal talks about issuing of travel authorization on humanitarian grounds as well. So for visa-free travelers, there's also this option, at least foreseen, to have a channel. And FRA has just recently produced a legal opinion on ETIAS, where we opened that the EU legislator should ensure that this article, this provision, continues to provide for travel authorizations with limited territorial validity to offer persons in need of international protection a legal channel at national level through which they can seek safety. Then the final element from the refugee-related schemes, temporary protection. We all know this famous or infamous directive 2001/55, which has not been used so far, never ever, but it's there, and the European Parliament as a co-legislator also listed the application of this directive as a possible measure to address the situation in Syria. Amongst the regular mobility schemes, the first one is family reunification. The directive on family reunification applies to refugees and sets forth more favorable conditions for them. So there's a door open, but we know there are some practical obstacles which seem to shut this door. The limited access to information, the limited access to embassies. Also, some member states tend to foresee a time window, I mean a deadline in legislation within which refugees can apply for this family reunification under the more favorable conditions, but the procedures might last really long, not mentioning the high costs involved. So there are some hooks, but there are also some obstacles which make it more burdensome. Then the second scheme, labor mobility. Of course, schemes for labor immigration and entrepreneurs can be made more accessible for people in need of international protection. In a similar vein, the mobility schemes for researchers can be for the benefit of persons in need of protection with facilitated access and accompanied with less bureaucratic requirements. An example for that is the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Fellowships under the EU Horizon 2020 program. So it's already there, just it's question of making use of it. Then mobility schemes for students are also available. There are some examples like the EU Erasmus Mundus program or national initiatives like France, who pledged to admit 1,000 Syrians through students' visas, or Germany, which already admitted roughly 200 Syrians to participate in scholarship programs as of mid-2017. The final one is medical evacuation, which provides for temporary admission of people with urgent medical needs where the treatment is not available in the third country, like the Czechs implemented the Medevac program for Ukrainians injured in clashes with the police forces in 2014 in East Ukraine. And nowadays, in this cooperation with Libya, another form of evacuation has also been envisaged and also implemented, like with some 200 vulnerable refugees from Libya have already been evacuated and transferred to Italy as well. So I would finish with the private sponsorships, but given that my time is up, I just leave it there. You can ask me questions about that and the rest of the presentation. Thanks for your kind attention.